Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted and truly honored to have with me Mr. Yuri Deigin, who's a longevity biotech entrepreneur working on partial reprogramming gene therapies and is the co-founder of Youth Biotherapeutics Incorporation. So Yuri, really appreciate you taking time and being part of a humble podcast. Now with longevity, the problem is obviously the aging. So to get to a solution, it starts with understanding the problem. So how much do we know of the problem, this problem called aging? Why do we age? What are the factors that leads to aging? It would be nice if you could talk about that.
I think we understand at least that it's a problem. At least the people working on it understand that aging is a problem. And unfortunately, among the general public, I think that understanding is lacking. I think most of the people not working on aging think that aging is not a problem. They think that it's just kind of sort of a fact of life that you have to accept and make peace with and just kind of push it out of your vision. And when you get old, when you get sick, kind of then you just kind of accept your fate and die with honor, which is, of course, I think incorrect. It's just an example of learned helplessness that humanity has had to make peace with until now, because now we finally have the tools to intervene. First of all, understand that, how biology works and then intervene in the biology. Because I think even like 50 years ago, we had some sort of understanding of how biology works, but we still couldn't intervene. So, and unless you can do something about a problem, maybe sometimes it's best to make peace with the problem, because you can't do anything about it. So if you kind of keep stressing about it, it really can make your life, unproductive and unhappy. But if you start being able to do something about a problem, and as big a problem as aging, which affects everybody, which causes so much suffering in the world, so much death. I mean, 90% of deaths in, today's most countries are caused by aging. The rest is, accidents, war, and so forth. And, to me, it's the biggest problem we're facing. So we should really be trying to do something about it, because if we're able to, alleviate some of the suffering because of the magnitude of the problem, it's already would have a huge impact on the world collectively. And so, but coming back to, I guess, more of the question about whether we understand the processes behind aging, unfortunately, we don't fully understand them yet. We have some preliminary understanding. We don't yet have it on the level of genes, for example, or genetic processes, or some other processes that we can pinpoint and say, okay, this is why we're aging, and if we intervene here, we're going to stop aging. We have some understanding on the level of hallmarks of aging. We can see what things go wrong, and we can have some hypotheses. Okay, maybe if we help clear senescent cells, bad cells that seem to have some sort of role in aging, maybe then we can slow aging down. Or maybe we see telomeres shortening. Maybe if we either lengthen them or slow down their shortening rate, we can again slow down aging. And so we have all sorts of hypotheses that we as a field collectively have been evaluating and tried to intervene at those levels. And we had some, preliminary, some positive results and negative results. But unfortunately, this kind of big picture, unified theory of aging is lacking, that we could then, if we had that theory of aging, that we would understand the mechanisms, at least on the level of mammals or humans, that we can say, okay, if we do this, this, and this, we can stop the aging process. Conversely, there is a bit of a different way to look at the problem, which is a bit of a, you could say, engineering approach, which has been popularized by Aubrey Gray and people who think that we don't need to understand the reasons for aging, because we see the manifestations of it. We can maybe intervene on the level of manifestations, and if we replenish or fix all sorts of damage that happens during aging, maybe then we can either restore the organism to a more youthful state or healthier state, and or that should cause a prolongation of lifespan and health span. And that's a bit of a circumvention of the trying to reverse engineer the hugely complex system of biology. So I guess I took a bit longer maybe than I should have in answering your question, but the simple answer is unfortunately not. But we're getting close to at least some interventions that we can do without fully understanding what it is that causes aging. We already have some things that we've observed to either slow down aging, definitely reverse aging on the cellular level, and this is reprogramming, which I'm working on, but also slow down aging on even organismal level. For example, some sorts of interventions like, caloric restriction is the big one that prolongs lifespan by 50% and so on in mice and many other organisms, or rapamycin and other small molecules that have produced incremental lifespan increases, 15, 20% lifespan increase, for example, in mouse models. And so we have interventions that we can already start trying to apply to humans without fully understanding the whole complex picture of the biology of aging. And we're also, in parallel, we, again, as a collective in the field, are working on trying to really dig deeper and understand better, like, what is it that causes aging?
I hope that in due course of time, we hopefully completely understand the reason of why we age. Because I guess if we completely understand that, maybe getting to a solution would be a little bit more simpler. Not simpler, maybe, but we could get to a complete solution. Now, you also mentioned that, we need to first acknowledge it as a problem. And I guess our society as a large in the world, and largely because of the blinders that we have created because of religion and so on and so forth, and or the narrative that it's an inevitability, like a death is inevitable or aging is inevitable, is that narrative I think needs to change, because people such as yourself are working at the cutting edge of science, and we understanding the source code of the life, and we're tinkering around with the DNA and possibly understanding much better on who we are, and that needs to be given like a little bit more serious research, where more a collaborative approach on understanding deeply who we are, what we are, why do we age, and maybe then possibly we could get into creating a solution which is more holistic or more right. Now, longevity as a subject, I mean, it's a little hazy, because there's various people say age reversal, and they also it's a little unclear on what that actually means. If and when we have a solution, would that mean that we'll be able to halt aging? Would that mean that we'll be able to reverse aging? If we are able to reverse age, would that mean that we would, like a 80 or 90-year-old person would be able to come back to 20 or maybe earlier?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? There are different layers or levels, I guess, of aging interventions. And of course, ultimately we would love to be able to completely have full control over biology and be able to fully rejuvenate a old person, no matter how old, to get him or her to preferred age as much young as they would like. Of course, whether that's even possible on the molecular level is a big question, because obviously, 90-year-old has already had some degeneration happen, some damage happen. That whether it's fully reversible is a huge question. Of course, you could probably reverse maybe by replace organs, the ultimate, full body replacement approach, maybe, as long as you can kind of have the brain intact. Maybe even you can replace areas of the brain, as long as the personality is there, you can probably in that way accomplish this, radical age reversal, radical rejuvenation of a 90-year-old. Barring that, setting that aside, that's kind of very, very kind of ultimate goal, I guess, full age reversal, there is a gradient essentially to what we what we can accomplish right now and that we'd like to accomplish in the near future. First and foremost, we would like to at least slow down the aging process so that we don't age as quickly, and we would like to make, 60 the new 30, right? So 60-year-old, if we can slow down the aging process and the person starts taking this therapy at age 30, the slowing down therapy, doesn't have to be our therapy, any therapy that can produce this therapeutic effect of slowing down aging, that person, by the time they're 60, should expect to have their health level remain, well, ideally, on the same level, but maybe if, the therapy is not perfect, at least increase to a level of a healthy 40-year-old rather than a 60-year-old that they will be chronologically. So that's kind of the first tier of the therapy that we're hoping to get as quickly as possible. And that's what we're working on right now as we speak. The partial reprogramming therapies are meant to be therapies that you take on a repeated basis that rewind your biological age by a certain amount every time you activate the therapy, with the goal then to slow down the aging process and produce this slowing down of aging. Ideally, we would like to have this freezing, age freeze, of course. Whether that's possible or not will be answered by studies and experiments that we'll be conducting and the therapies that we hope to be iteratively improving. The next step is actual reversal, whether we can reverse the biological age of a 30-year-old to make him or her 25 or 20. And of course, the difference, thankfully, on a entropy level between a 30-year-old and a 20-year-old is not that large. So potentially you could have a 30-year-old be rejuvenated to the health of a 20-year-old. And if we're able to do that, and we have the age freeze, then there's a whole new category of people that this opens up to actually fully rejuvenate and kind of freeze their biological age at a young enough level that they can then remain healthy, remain this biologically young for hundreds of years, potentially. And, if we accomplish that, but don't get this 90-year-old to 20-year-old reversal, that's already a huge, huge accomplishment for humankind. And this will allow, billions of people to remain much, much healthier for, ultimately hundreds of years, if we're able to accomplish those things.
Right. So you're saying that eventually we'll be able to slow aging, possibly freeze aging, and then maybe even get to reversing aging. What is it that makes you say this? Has this been emulated in animals? Has this been done in research work? Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on the cellular level, on the level of a single cell, we've been able to reverse aging fully, rejuvenate cells fully. We can take cells from a 100-year-old person and then rejuvenate them to a level of a baby and restore, for example, mitochondrial function in a fibroblast of a 100-year-old donor, restore it all the way back to youthful levels. And so we know that on the cellular level, we can rejuvenate, yes, very powerfully cells. Now, the next step is whether we're able to take these results and replicate them in the context of an already formed organism. And that's the current, again, another $1 million question or $1 trillion question, where we're trying to replicate these, things that we can do with cells in a petri dish. We're trying to figure out a way to do this in a live animal. And it's tricky, right? Because essentially we're trying to repair a car while it's actually driving on the road, and it's hard. And what gives us optimism is that in some preliminary animal studies, we've been able to replicate some of these. Well, first of all, the slowing down of aging, and slowing down of aging has been shown in so many different models. Basically, if you extend lifespan even by a small molecule, in that way you can produce a slowing down of aging, because if the curve actually, like the lifespan curve moves, essentially you have slowed down the rate at which animals would normally age without the intervention. And also we can, with, for example, animal experiments in the reprogramming space, we can get the readout of biological age by various parameters, but usually people use epigenetic clocks. And we can see that the biological age as measured by these epigenetic clocks is slowed down, or the increase in aging is slowed down relative to control groups, basically, that don't get the therapy. So all of that collectively gives us optimism that eventually we will be able to slow down aging and reverse aging, because we can do it on a cellular level. The next goal is to do this on an organ level, like a collection of cells, and then within the organism, and then ultimately systemic rejuvenation at the level of the entire animal. And I'm sure, I don't see any fundamental reasons why translating the results in a cell, rejuvenating cells, cannot be done in a collection of cells in a formed organism. It's just a matter of figuring out, like, getting the technology there, getting this, it's an engineering problem, getting, what you can do from cellular level on the level of a formed organism. It's, our tools are not perfect yet. For example, gene therapy delivery mechanisms are not perfect yet, but I think eventually humanity will figure it out. Of course, the challenge for us is to figure out as quickly as possible so that our parents, our loved ones, hopefully ourselves, are able to benefit from these therapies. But even if we don't, I think within 100 years, humanity will figure these things out for sure.
Right. So I think, we quickly moving from science fiction to science fact, all of these looked a little impossible at some point in time, but because of science, innovation, and bright, crazy minds such as yourself, I guess you guys are pushing the boundary of what's impossible. And if we solve the problem of aging, like you mentioned, it's the largest problem in the world, because we are so many old people, and all diseases are eventually age related. After a certain point of age, then you get these host of other diseases also. You are the co-founder of Youth Biotherapeutics Inc., and you're leveraging partial cellular reprogramming. You mentioned about it, but could you elaborate on it and explain your approach of partial cellular reprogramming?
Okay, so partial reprogramming, this whole approach to rejuvenation, is based, of course, on full reprogramming, cellular reprogramming, that has been discovered by Yamanaka and Takahashi back in 2006. And cellular reprogramming, as I'm sure people have heard of it, maybe in the context of some popular science articles, is that ability that I think I already mentioned, to take any cell, already formed cell in a human body or animal body, mouse body, and turn it back all the way back into an embryonic cell. So of course, when we form as embryos, everything starts out from a single cell, single fertilized egg, and then starts dividing, and you get these embryonic stem cells that ultimately end up building, your whole organism. And so for a while, people thought that the process that goes from this embryonic stem cell into differentiated skin cell is irreversible, that cells can only, roll down this epigenetic landscape into differentiated states and never can roll back up. But Yamanaka turned that around, basically showed that it actually is possible to reverse cells all the way back into embryonic-like state. And he found the cocktail of these four that have become known Yamanaka factors, a cocktail of 4 transcription factors that triggers this. You put these 4 transcription factors into a cell, and that cell magically, from a fibroblast or from a neuron, starts changing its morphology and everything else within it, its genetic program, and becomes an embryonic stem cell, which you can then proliferate, divide, and you can turn into some other cell type. So you can take a skin cell and turn it into a neuron, or retinal pigment cell, and you can then maybe try to fix some things in if you have some problems in a given tissue, you can do these stem cell therapies that have been tried for already in the context of clinical trials, but that is kind of the full reprogramming process. What aging research has been blessed with is when this reprogramming process was being studied, we again collectively noticed that cells that undertake this path to embryonic-like state, they get rejuvenated, like physiologically rejuvenated. On a cellular level, there's various cellular hallmarks of aging, misfolded proteins, bad mitochondrial function, etc., that all get better with the reprogramming process. Essentially, you start with an old fibroblast and you get a young embryonic stem cell out of that fibroblast. And that was the kind of eye-opening moment for aging researchers that have tried to then immediately figure out, okay, can we apply this in the context of already existing organisms? And it's been a long journey, and eventually, like right now, the answer is, if not full yes, then it's at least a very strong maybe. And the strong maybe came from an animal study that was done by Professor Ocampo and colleagues out of Salk, with whom we actually collaborate, Professor Ocampo out of the University of Lausanne. He is the first author of this paper that came out in 2016 that showed that you can actually use Yamanaka factors in vivo in the context of an already formed animal to do this rejuvenation, but without all the kind of downstream effects of this full reprogramming. That's why it's called partial reprogramming, because full reprogramming takes cells all the way back to the repotency, and partial reprogramming doesn't. Partial reprogramming just tries to get the rejuvenating part of reprogramming. It doesn't want cells changing identity. It wants fibroblast or skin cell to remain a skin cell, and neuron to remain a neuron. We want the cells to keep doing their job, but we just want to rejuvenate them by some margin. And that, unfortunately, the line between rejuvenation and this dedifferentiation is a little bit blurry, and the research process is trying to identify, okay, what's the safe therapeutic window where you get the rejuvenation, but you don't yet get into the risky aspects of reprogramming. And basically, how partial does a partial reprogramming have to be for you to get the safely get the benefits of reprogramming, rejuvenating benefits of it without getting into the risks. And so this then, started this massive field of partial reprogramming that now, both companies like Altos Labs with their $3 billion funding, or RetroBio or New Limit Bio, also $100 million funding, both companies. And you get, Jeff Bezos and Brian Armstrong, again, like heavy hitters from the investment community backing this approach. Basically, because they realize it's, well, I guess both the financial potential, but I think more importantly, the human benefit and benefit to humanity potential, that you can produce all sorts of rejuvenating therapies as a start, like forget about like longevity, just to start with age-related diseases, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, even cancer. You can have rejuvenating therapies or therapeutic partial reprogramming therapies that can alleviate all sorts of age-related diseases, and this will already produce massive benefits to humanity. And of course, well, if you're able to do that, you get massive financial return as well. And so, again, I think I took a long way to answer your question. Basically, this is what the partial reprogramming field is taking the benefits, rejuvenating benefits of reprogramming and trying to harness them in a context of rejuvenation.
Thank you, Yuri. Really appreciate you explaining it so nicely, because it's so amazing that any skin cell can be reprogrammed into a stem cell. That itself is magical, and you are leveraging a partial cellular reprogramming. Are there only pros, or there are cons also? Because, when you're reprogramming your cell, is the cell kind of losing its identity? That's my first question. You mentioned about Altos Labs, $3 billion, heavily funded. They are also taking a partial reprogramming or a complete cellular reprogramming approach, right? So would you like to talk also about your peers and their approach that has caught your attention?
Sure. Well, maybe to answer the last question first, because it's fresh, Altos has definitely started as a partial reprogramming companies. But I think they have now morphed into something much broader because their whole approach was to try to basically vacuum up all of the key opinion leaders in the longevity space, give them big salaries, and ask them to maybe essentially continue what they've been doing previously in terms of their research. And so they got like 20 or maybe more PIs now working on so many different things that I think Altos has now done, become a much bigger than just partial reprogramming. Coming back to the first question, of course there are risks. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be, researching therapies. If everything was just, pros, we would have had a working therapy long ago. The cons are, of course, massive because you are risking cells losing their function, losing their identity, and then losing their function. Or, I mean, both are, because you need your skin cell to remain a skin cell, or you need your brain cell to remain a brain cell for you to keep functioning, for it to your organs to keep functioning. And if they actually stop doing that, the biggest risk is you're going to die. And this is the risk we're trying to avoid in mouse models. And this is how partial reprogramming was established to even be possible. I mean, because until 2016, until that Ocampo and Al paper came out, people thought that in vivo reprogramming is not possible. Like the first attempts to do that, they just saw, teratomas, these tumors, and mice dying, because they said, okay, we've been dosing these mice for 2 weeks with Yamanaka factors, and like we had all these unfortunate results. The mice didn't get younger, the mice died. And so the first question then for the Ocampo group in Salk was, okay, what's the safest duration of reprogramming that these mice can tolerate without dying? And that was the first experiment they did, and they established that, okay, 2 days of these factor induction is safe. And so then they did the protocol. The whole protocol was, okay, let's do 2 days of active dosing, and then we do 5 days of chase, 5 days of, without any Yamanaka factors, and then repeat. And they've been repeating that cycle for weeks, and that not only was safe, but also it produced that therapeutic benefit that we're after. Therapeutic benefit being the mice have lived longer and they've been morphologically younger than the untreated siblings. And this essentially right now is the biggest challenge we're trying to solve. We're trying to see what is the way that we can make this therapy as safe as possible with minimizing risk of losing cell identity loss, with losing cell identity, with not causing cell identity loss. And trying to establish, okay, maybe different tissues, different cell types have different limitations or different requirements for how long you can go with the reprogramming process before you reach some unwanted side effects. And this is what I think at this point the field has now kind of graduated to, figuring out, like, on a tissue by tissue basis, organ by organ basis, what it is that we can do in the context of this particular organ and this particular cell type within this organ with this reprogramming to ensure safely that we can safely rejuvenate this tissue, the cell type in this organ without any sorts of risk that can cause harm to the functioning of the entire organism. And so, like any therapy, of course, it's you have to find this balance, this therapeutic window between you get the benefit, but you don't yet get the risks. And partial reprogramming is no different. So that's what we and others are after. And in terms of peers in the space, I think by now there's 6 or 7 companies in the partial reprogramming landscape. So besides ourselves, there's Altos Labs that I mentioned, RetroBio, New Limit, I mentioned these 3. These are, I think, the most recent entrants in the space. The oldest, the first company actually was Ethereum that I founded. That was the first partial reprogramming company in 2017. The second oldest is TurnBio. They're still operational. I think by now they're not the biggest, because I guess Altos Lab is the biggest, but they have the most advanced program in terms of research into this, because they've been doing it since 2018. So TurnBio, they're working with mRNA delivery. That's also recently been quite popularized. There's also Iduna, which is part of LiveBio, David Sinclair's group. There is Shift Bio. They're looking for novel factors. That's their, I think, core mission, to find novel factors, something better than the Yamanaka factors. And I think Reverse Bio is the last company by this Michael West company. It's been spun out of Ajax. And they've been, Michael West has been looking into reprogramming for almost as long as Yamanaka, if not longer. I think they actually have competing patents. But I think they're looking at, I think they were looking at small molecules, this ITR, induced tissue rejuvenation, induced tissue regeneration aspect of reprogramming that they were after, I think, triggering that by small molecules. And Calico's been looking at this also, but I think their key person was then poached by New Limit. So now New Limit, I think, as the partial reprogramming program that Calico used to have. Right. But I think Calico is proceeding with also some looking into partial reprogramming.
Right. So exciting things happening. And this is a multi-billion, multi-trillion dollar opportunity. Whoever gets it right is going to solve, I think, one of the most largest problem that humanity is facing. My only hope is, obviously, the way things are, that each organization has to obviously work towards their approach, but there is so much that can be done if all of these teams that you mentioned about, join hand and collaborate. There is obviously the problem with the patents and things like that. But I guess the only reason we came to a vaccine in a 6 months time, which takes sometimes between 4 to 5 to 6 years time, is the only reason is because we collaborated, the entire world collaborated. And today the aging population really is crying out for help, and my dad and anybody, everyone, a certain age, if they can get this solution, it'll be super awesome. You mentioned about Altus Labs, getting most of the key opinion leaders in the space, but you yourself also have Dr. Alejandro Ocampo, who's a pioneer in cellular engineering. Then you have How Pedro, again, one of the leaders in the space. So wishing you the very best, and it looks super, super exciting for the common man who are waiting for something like this. I know it's a question which is very vague, and I'm sure you get asked about it a lot, but what would be the timelines of this becoming market ready?
Yeah, it's a very tough question, because so much depends on whether we succeed in demonstrating early stage animal results, or the animal stage results are positive. And because if they're negative, we kind of have to reiterate and go back to kind of step one and redesign therapies and figure out what went wrong. But if all goes well, if animal studies are positive and we do see that we're able to take the gene therapy approach and rejuvenate the organs enough for them to see organismal level rejuvenation or a therapeutic benefit in the context of disease, and you can expect like the regular timeline of taking a drug from animal studies to human clinical trials, on the order of 5 to 7 years, I guess, again, in a good scenario. And of course, before you'll see a whole body rejuvenating therapy, we have to figure out on a tissue by tissue level, disease by disease level, whether we have a therapeutic benefit. And the regulatory pathway will be going through those milestones. So we have to start with therapies like, for example, we're targeting Alzheimer's. So because the brain for us is a key organ of interest. So, and within the brain, there's several age-related diseases that we can target. And if we observe a therapeutic benefit and take all the steps required for us to get a therapy on the market, for example, Alzheimer's therapy, which will take, as I said, like if everything goes well, 5 to 7 years, you should have, we'll start clinical trials if all goes well, probably 3 or 4 years down the road. But if the clinical trials are successful, eventually, after clinical trials, I think within 7 years that therapy could be approved. Again, this is a very optimistic timeline, as I said, if all goes well. And from then, the kind of collection of different therapies and targeting different organs will start to kind of become bigger and bigger, so that eventually maybe you could have some combinatorial treatments, something targeting the brain, something targeting the muscle, etc., for rejuvenation of a healthy person. So rather than therapy used in the context of a disease, ultimately our goal is to have this combinatorial therapy to be used in the context of a healthy person to prevent disease. And when that will be, clinically approved, I think this will take, 15 to 20 years again, in the optimistic timeline. Whether, if we see some preliminary good results, whether some biohackers might be able to combine these therapies without the regular kind of regulatory pathway that these therapies undergo, that's an open question. And I mean, already we have this kind of dual realities, that there are companies that take the existing conventional approach of taking drugs through the approval process in the context of regulated clinical trials with, say, FDA and so on, other regulators. And then there's a whole different ecosystem of people who are biohackers, who are willing to maybe take a little bit of personal risk to try some yet unapproved therapies that are only beginning to be evaluated, like telomerase gene therapies or clotho or other gene therapies, that follistatin gene therapies that people are willing to try on themselves. And so I think there will be some period of early availability of such therapies, but like when these therapies will be fully approved and fully kind of tested for the general public to be able to do this in the context of, for example, their family doctor guiding them to take this therapy, I think this will be, as I said, 15 to 20 years down the road. Again, pending all the success at all of the preceding steps of animal studies and then safety studies and the human clinical trials and so forth.
Right.
But it's not 100 years, and it's not 5 years. Like within the next 5 years, I don't think we'll have a therapy that's full body systemic rejuvenation. But optimistically, I think within a few decades, we'll have a therapy like that available for everybody.
Thank you. Really appreciate you taking time and being part of our podcast. Yes, I think we're living in a fantastic point of time, and gone are the time when things were on a linear pattern. Now everything is exponential, and with our human minds, we have artificial intelligence, which is assisting us in ways which is unimaginable, unfathomable, through bioinformatics and so on and so forth. So what was looking at maybe 10 years can sometimes even happen in the next couple of years. So exciting point of time. My last question to you, there are a lot of people at this point in time, you mentioned about biohackers, but there are a lot of people who are taking supplements, they're doing intermittent fasting. So what would you advise, like the 50 years, 60 years old who really are looking forward for something like this? What can they do now to control their aging, both in the form of lifestyles or taking supplements? Is there a routine that you follow? Maybe address that, and what's the moonshot? What comes next for you and your company?
At this moment, for people to try to kind of slow down their aging, unfortunately, I don't have any kind of secret recipes that people don't already know. I think it's common wisdom out there is already well known that you should exercise. You should definitely not overeat, watch your calories, because excessive weight could exacerbate all sorts of health issues. It starts with like metabolic issues, could progress to diabetes, and this really increases all sorts of risks for cardiovascular disease, etc. And of course, you shouldn't engage in things that really harm your health, like smoking, excessive drinking, and so forth. And so unfortunately, it's all these kind of boring things that you should be doing to increase your chances, or maximize your chances of living long enough to get to all these wonderful potential novel interventions that are coming down the pipe in the next few decades. And in terms of supplements, there's definitely a lot of supplements that people are using, biohackers. are using, and some anecdotal positive results, anecdotal negative results, or anecdotal lack of positive results. And it's very hard to navigate. And I think it all comes down to there not being a large enough positive effect that will be obviously noticeable that people could, point to and reproduce, like, I don't know, with steroids. Like, you take steroids, it's very noticeable, the effect. Like, even if you, like, anecdotal observations, the effect is so large that you can then confidently say, okay, yeah, this therapy works. If you want to build muscle, steroids work. Of course, there's side effects, there's downsides. Don't take steroids. It's not a medical advice. But for longevity interventions, you start taking, I don't know, supplement X. And unfortunately, there's no such effect that all of a sudden you look 20 years younger and your gray hair starts, repigmenting. Unfortunately, there's no obviously working intervention like that. So in the absence of which, people have to essentially do a lot of experimentation and reliance on some animal studies that might not then translate in the human, or their effect in mice might not translate in humans. So basically, it all comes down to, like, personally, I've stopped using any sorts of biohacking supplements for a few years now, just because I didn't find anything that produced a large enough effect that I couldn't contribute it to just a placebo effect on myself. And in terms of, like, personally, I don't do anything crazy, just try to exercise, at least, again, very safely, because you don't want to overdo it. Exercise routines have a lot of risk, health risk. You can injure yourself, and you can, overtraining is definitely also a potential issue. Like, people who push themselves, they run marathons, they could have actual heart problems. So I think moderate exercise, just, very, very safe exercise is great. I like sauna. I've been kind of a sauna fan for my whole life, actually, like, ever since I was a child. There's some benefits to sauna use, like in observational studies. I don't think they've done interventional studies on sauna. And so some people, I know Rhonda Patrick's been very bullish on sauna, and others, and then other people have been saying that maybe we're being a little over-interpreting correlation, essentially. But I mean, I like sauna. I think it has a lot of, I see minimal risks, and I see potential cardiovascular benefits, and I enjoy it. So that's why I do that. And I forgot your other question.
What comes next for you and your company?
Oh, well, I mean, my moonshot is obviously partial reprogramming and for youth bio. So we are doing our research, and we're focusing on, Yamanaka factor therapies, trying to translate them in a tissue-specific context. Like I mentioned, the brain is one of our key areas of interest. And also in parallel, we're looking for novel factors, because Yamanaka factors, they weren't designed for rejuvenation. They were designed for full reprogramming, but we're trying to find better factors that they can just produce the rejuvenation without the dedifferentiation part. And so this is the research that we're doing, is kind of two-pronged approach with existing Yamanaka therapies that we are already testing in animals in the context of diseases, and in vitro research area that we're trying to find novel factors to create version 2 and version 3 of these therapies that we're now using with Yamanaka factors. And just going forward with that program, I mean, our ultimate mission is to extend youth span. It's youth bias, so we're after youth span. We want people to remain as young as possible for as long as possible, as long as they want. And eventually, this comes back to, like, the initial thesis of our conversation. We want to have the ability to at least freeze, if not rejuvenate the biological age, at least freeze the increase in biological age. So age freeze is our ultimate mission that we see ourselves embarking on for the next decade or two. But we're starting small with existing diseases, and ultimately we want to figure out, like, what's the minimal number of organs and tissues that we need to target to have this systemic rejuvenation or systemic slowing down of the aging process. And that's what we're currently working on.
Lovely. Thank you, Yuri. Really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. You guys are on a path which could completely upend the society, and your Twitter headline, I mean, I'll just parting note, I'll just, the Twitter headline says preventing death is my life's mission. That is so awesome. If we can, I think there is a certain population which is always ridicules these very brave out there thinkers, but I guess it's about time we've entered the 21st century, and it's about time we need to go bold. On that note, thank you for being part of the podcast, and to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button, and until next time, see you guys. Bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
Thank you. No, it was my pleasure. I love talking on these topics. So thank you for the opportunity to talk more about it.